Welcome, or hopefully welcome back to the Reluctant Entrepreneur podcast, where we explore the journeys of innovators, disruptors, and problem solvers who turn ideas into thriving businesses. Today, I'm excited to introduce a guest who lives at the intersection of technology and entrepreneurship, Bill Boulden. Bill is a fractional CTO, Chief Technology Officer, who specializes in taking ideas from concept to finished product, helping non-technical founders and CEOs navigate the complex world of software development. Through services like Power Hours, where he claims to save thousands of dollars and multiple headaches, VIP days to solve bigger developer blockers, and full-scale fractional CTO engagements, Bill guides startups to launch their products efficiently and effectively. His expertise spans AWS architecture, React, Serverless, Node.js, DevOps, and more, offering a rare combination of technical brilliance and development acumen. Bill's clients rave about his ability to distill complex technical strategies into actionable insights, ensuring that projects not only meet deadlines, but exceed expectations. Whether it's scaling a startup or helping founders avoid costly pitfalls, Bill's impact is undeniable. In this episode, we'll dive into Bill's journey, uncover what it takes to turn tech ideas into reality, and explore the lessons he's learned along the way. If you're a founder wondering how to bring your tech vision to life, this is an episode you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Well, hey, Bill, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm a hack. I'm a software hack. Not in a good way, not in a terrible way. Not that I do bad things with my software, but I'm a horrible software programmer. But when I first started my company 33 years ago, I couldn't afford someone like yourself, that knew how to code. And I dusted off my old knowledge of BASIC from way back in the 70s and hacked together some code that would run our equipment. And it worked. Fortunately, customers didn't see, all they had was an executable. They didn't see the code itself. And I'm sure if you saw it, it would be a poster child for how not to develop code. But those were the days.
And as we discussed in a pre-show meeting, BASIC was also my first language. Way back in 1989. I still have fond memories of it.
What I love about BASIC is, right now, if I read the code you wrote, I wouldn't know what the product does, right? Because it's so full of very specific syntax commands and acronyms and things like that. BASIC is basically English. Even if you don't know how to code BASIC, if you don't know the proper syntax, you can kind of see what's going on, right? It's a very expansive language. So it's a big language. I think there's a reason
that it spoke to an enchanted 6-year-old Billy. There's something about it when you see if this, then that just is friendlier to a young person than the semicolons and braces of C++ and stuff, even though, obviously you get there later.
Yeah, well, I do believe, and I think we talked about this in our pre-show meeting, but I do believe that all schools, in addition to math and science and English and history, really in the elementary level ought to teach coding, and not to develop the next generation of coders necessarily, but to teach critical thinking, to teach logic, because what you had mentioned, if, then, else, that's life, right? I mean, if this happens, have a plan. If this happens, you go left. If you don't go left, you go right. Otherwise, you do something else if the conditions don't match. And when I learned that basic part of basic programming, I learned to think logically and problem solve. And I always knew what my next move would be, right? And I think that's a valuable thing to get in while kids are still young. And
something that I'll never forget is I think I was like 11 and I was in my first programming class that was offered at my high school, junior high. And the instructor we had, the teacher who was teaching coding, on the first day of class, he said, I'm going to teach you what it's like to be a programmer. I'm the computer, and you're going to tell me what to do. He gets out a jar of peanut butter, and he says, tell me how to open this jar of peanut butter. right? And
I
somebody's like,
saw
well,
a video like that
your
recently.
hand on it. And he's
Right,
like,
right.
that, or no matter what. It's like, no, I didn't mean like that. I didn't mean like that.
Yeah.
He's like, okay,
I,
get used
I,
to this.
I
This
have
is how it's
seen
going to be.
exactly that same presentation online, and it was, it was meant to be humorous, but it also drove a point. Be careful what you ask for, right? It was that type of thing. So Bill, what did you, before you started your world into fractional CTO ship? What did you do before that? What's your background?
I've only ever been a developer and a musician. I'm a rare bird that does entirely the thing I went to college for. I programmed and made bad music all through high school. When I went to college, I had enough credit hours that I could get a double degree. So I got a BS in computer science and a BA in music composition. I went straight into a career of being an indie musician and a junior developer, and then
Wow.
kind of leveled up both for 20 straight years after that. I would say from about 2001 to 2013, I rose up the ranks just one step at a time: junior, mid, senior, full stack, architect, CTO. And then I got my first real CTO position in 2014. It was full time, and that went very well. I had a very good time there with the people I started that company with. It did exit. And then what happened is I was trying to find the magic again throughout 2018, 2019. And I had some bad bets, right? Started another startup. I ran out of capital in 4 months. I did a good job. I built a good product. But it wasn't the right idea at the right time. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. At this point, I'm changing health insurers for the third time in a single calendar year. And that is traumatic in America.
Sure.
Right. So mid 2020, I'm looking at some new gigs and they're like, oh, we want you. And I'm like, listen, I have a new idea. Don't say you want me full time. You don't really, this isn't like me driving a taxi or working an assembly line. It's not like double hours is double as good. Just let me work for you a little every day, and maybe I'll work on something else too, so that when your startup, works or doesn't work, I don't have all my eggs in one basket. And that company, we had a great experience with. They were a podcast hosting company, and I'd like to say that I think we got them out the door with an MVP and probably under 25 grand, like less than 3 or 4 months.
And for
And
my listeners, MVP is an acronym for?
minimum viable product.
There you go.
There's a lot that's been written about minimal viable products, but this is a good time for our first digression. A lot of non-technical founders are very used to interacting with essentially what I like to think of as finished software. You look at
Sure.
something that you're used to, like Uber or Airbnb or Duolingo, and just every single thing about it is nice. And
Yeah.
you look back and it's like, yeah, at this point in its life cycle, it may have had $50 million of developer hours and designer hours poured into it. It
Right.
should be nice, right?
It is not an MVP by the time it gets into consumers' hands.
Right, exactly. An MVP is the smallest thing you can possibly build that helps you validate if there's a there before you invest further capital, right? So everything I do is oriented around the almighty MVP. You've got an idea for an app where, let's see, I make these up off the top of my head at this point. It can calculate the value of something that should be in real estate escrow. I don't know. And you don't need a whole TurboTax looking thing with built-in Excel spreadsheets or whatever. You need to make a few sales and be like, do you like these answers? Should there be a software around it, right? Whatever it is, it's an app that does one thing. It's a site with one thing. It's a database that stands on its own. It's an algorithm that you send to your client manually and see if they like the answer. It's a single chat bot without its own whole supporting ecosystem. Something you do that then you can look at and you can be like, this is a nothing burger, or people are interested, I'm going to try a little more.
In another industry, we would call that proof of concept, right? It's enough to prove you're onto something, or to either move it forward or kill it.
And the key thing is to do what's established product market fit, right? And so product market fit is key. It's the idea that you have a product, but also that you have a market. And like in the last 3 weeks, I've met 16 new founders. And the number one thing I try to tell them is I always like your product. And generally I always do. Products are cool, but don't take this the wrong way. Do you have a market? Does the market have the capacity to learn about your solution? Will they ever hear of it? Does the market have the capacity to pay for your solution? Is the market big enough? And as recently as this morning, I was helping a founder who had a nightlife activity app that's very good. I like the app. It's really cool. He lives in a smaller city. And that's an example of maybe we talked about not having product market fit. Your product is good, but as long as you're using it for all that's fit to print in the nightlife of a tier 2.5 American city, you're not going to make $1 billion. And it's like, you need a different market. So I try to tell my founders to stop worrying so much about their product and actually focus a lot more on their market.
Right. You're unlike, I have a few friends that are software developers, one for Adobe, one for Condé Nast, one, so they're on payroll, but their job, they're given a scope of work and they write code. I don't believe they think about whether or not this is a viable product or, there's a customer base for it. They're told that this thing needs to perform this function, and it's yes, sir, yes, ma'am, boom, done, right? And I think what sounds unique about you is you have the ability to write the code, and have it perform a specific function, but you also have the ability to look beyond the horizon and give an input as to whether or not this is a viable product, or ways to validate whether the product is viable, whether the market is there, whether other people are doing it. So it's a little combination of business intelligence and coding, which are completely different ecosystems, right?
Thank you for saying that. I do consider my main differentiating factor is that I know how the sausage is made, but I also have a lot of opinions about how you should season it, and
right.
You'll get it on the butcher market's shelves. So I know that coding work and dev work, especially with both AI and Upwork and Fiverr, is becoming very fungible, right? And so when people say, I have a bid from a guy in, Bulgaria who can do this for a third of what you're quoting, and it's like, okay, but you'll be giving them an SOW and they'll do it and you'll get what you asked for. You won't have someone who's a true partner who stands up and says, this mobile ad won't convert, by the way, or I know about another startup that tried this same thing. You should partner with them. Rising tide floats all boats. That's the je ne sais quoi, where it's like there are people who are good at that. There are people who are good at dev. I like to think I'm a little bit of a special snowflake in that I have both of those things.
Well, just the fact that you're a musician and a coder, tells me that there's a lot of left brain and right brain, all engaged. Even though I think I'm not a musician by any means. When I was young, I would play guitar. I used to play drums, but I couldn't read music. But I do think that the original software coding was musicians writing music. Think about it. I mean, it's code, right? Anyone who knows how to play a piano or a cello or a trombone can read the same language of circles and lines and things like that, and can create the same music, with different instruments, but using the same language, right? It's to me that was the original coding, back in the day, and I do
I've
think,
also heard music called the universal language for that very reason.
yeah, yeah. So you obviously have a very strong technical acumen to start a business. What didn't you know about running a business when you first started compared to what you know today? And maybe limit it to 400 or 500 things.
400 or 500. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to trim a few then. I think the biggest thing that's salient to me, because I own Boulden LLC, and that's my business, but it's basically a slush fund that helps keep my work money separate from my personal money. Uh, and then also basically being a co-driver or passenger seat at like 8 other LLCs or Incs right now. The most salient lesson is breaking out of the idea that anyone is going to give you an assignment. And I think that's probably the biggest culture shock that people have. I know I had it, but also startup people in general. You come from a world where you used to have a boss or whatever, money showed up in the bank account, you got tasks, you did tasks. There's a new element of go. No one will come to save you. Literally, no one will put up that blog post but you. No one will make your webinar slides but you. Oh, sales are down. What are you going to do about it? Not anyone else, who are you going to go ask for some
What
sales?
department are you going to call? Right.
Wish for the sales fairy.
All extensions lead to your phone ringing.
Right. So, I would say that in my life as Bill Bolden LLC, I probably spend about 2/3 of the day doing work and about a third of the day on what I like to call aimless lead gen, right? Which is, I'm not going to cold call. I'm not going to cold email. That's not how I work. That's never how I work. I consider it mildly sociopathic for someone in my industry doing what I do. So people have to come to me, and that means that at all times, I have to just be sort of doing things that keep me out there. This podcast, not to, look behind the curtain, but this podcast is one of them. But speaking at conferences, applying to speak at conferences, being the all-star mentor for Techstars, giving hours of time volunteering to community events, Techstars events, offering to teach guest lectures at my local University of Buffalo. The list just goes on and on. And you kind of do that never knowing how it will lead to a check at any point. But over a decade, in addition to being rewarding on the way, it does. Right?
Yeah, I have. It's so funny you say that. I have the exact same experience. We went for the first. My company's 33 years old. For the first 20 plus years, we did the traditional what the whole world thinks is traditional marketing. We would run ads. We would exhibit in trade shows on the trade show floor, dragging hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment to the show. Our ads were totally obnoxious. They were cool at the time, but it was basically, to loosely paraphrase our ads, we are the best, everyone else sucks. And we were braggadocious, and we were just in your face, and we were loud. And then we finally got tired of the sound of our own noise and switched to a 100% education-based model. Mm-hmm. We don't do that anymore. I haven't run an ad. Our company hasn't run an ad in well over a decade, maybe a little longer. I speak at conferences all around the world. I write technical papers. I write columns for our trades. I sit on the board of directors for our trade association. I produce technical, non-commercial webinars. I have a series of little 10-minute tips and tricks series, for the specific industry we're in. I do podcasts. I have a technical podcast, and then this one. But for reasons I can't explain, they're more sales god reasons. I say sales god metaphorically, but somehow that pleases the sales gods, and business rolls in. And
they are like little offerings at the shrine.
We
of
are
the sales
we are
god.
bringing bowls of fruit to the sales god, basically. But I do think I'm kind of either cursed or blessed with. I need to have causation in everything that I do and everything that happens. I need to understand why, and I kind of come to peace with. I don't always understand the reasons why, but it's enough to just understand it works. But I do think part of it, to your point, is when you're doing the things you're doing and I'm doing the things I'm doing, I call that conscious marketing. And I think we become, and I hate this word because it's been exploited by others, but we kind of, within our space, become influencers, authority-based influencers, not TikTok twerky influencers, but authority-based influencers, and we become a trusted source of valuable information. And I'll tell you, one webinar on the subject of a problem someone's having is worth 1 million paid ads saying how great we are. Right? I don't even think there's parity at all there. But
when I do my guest lecturing, for students, some of the questions I'm asked a lot, and I'm also asked this by juniors, is like, how do you do it with the networking? And there's a certain je ne sais quoi where you in order to network, you have to get rid of the idea that you're going to walk around, shake someone's hand, and it's going to be like a lead. It isn't like that.
No.
Basically, the way I look at it is that I have a swimming pool that's empty of a lifetime of people who might know me. And every time I network, every time I meet somebody,
it's more water in the pool.
Pouring one more cup of water into the swimming pool.
Yeah.
And if you just do it and then you're like, why isn't my swimming pool full? Be like, that's not enough to swim in. You have to just keep pouring it in 1 cup at a time. And then one day you look back and you can swim.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. What were some of the misconceptions you had about owning your own business? What have you learned? What did you think it would be like, and what is it actually like?
I don't know if this is gonna put me on the other side of most of your guests, Mike, but it actually is about what I thought it would be. Great. I had a feeling taxes and bookkeeping would be annoying. I had a feeling.
Well, you're right there. Yeah, there's no misconception there.
With the times.
Yeah.
But honestly, the most pleasant surprise is picking my own hours as my brain rides the wave of the day. It's
right.
I think the biggest win about this lifestyle is that I can sink in a dawn till dusk day if the neurons are firing and I can launch a product. But that if I have gotten 2 or 3 hours of code or consulting out, and then I sit in a 2-hour PCI compliance meeting or HIPAA compliance meeting, and I'm just like a pile of porridge at the end of it, I can go for a walk and say that's right. Enough for today. That's brain melting shit, right?
Right, exactly. What were some of the biggest challenges that you've faced to date in your entrepreneurial journey?
I would say the rate at which it is feast or famine. I'm more used to it now, but especially
it's scary, isn't it?
It really is. And so I'm a little bit like in that one Aesop's fable, whoever like the good one who stores some nuts for winter is that there have been months where I've banked 30 grand in a single month in accounts receivable. And you got to understand that for something that's just some dude doing exactly what he wants to do, that's pretty cool. Be like, I'm on track to make over $250,000 this year.
Sure. And in your world, unlike the manufacturing world that I'm in, if I book 30 grand on Tuesday, I got to spend, I got to spend 10 and a half of that to buy parts and pay labor and overhead and,
No, yeah,
all that stuff.
is raw profit, which is great.
Right. Because this is mind, this is intellect that you're selling, right? And experience that you're selling.
For famine nature of it,
Yeah.
I also have months I make stone cold
zero. Yeah. Yeah.
A bagel, a donut. As
the whole of a bagel. You don't even get the bread.
As recently as this last October, I made September, October, I made $0.0 at all. And so fortunately, when I had a March that was gangbusters, I had plenty of money in the bank to ride out September, October. But I would say that in the 5 years I've had this lifestyle, I have had 6-figure swings in my annual tax return that I file.
Yeah.
Just over $100,000 difference depending on the year.
Yeah.
2023 was a good year for me. 2024 was pretty hard. Although I don't know if there's any permanent lessons from that. The macroeconomic conditions were bad. And also it was very hard for me personally, because for me to get paid, there have to be people who are sinking money into new ventures. And there was a period of uncertainty leading up to the election, which I will not comment on. But I think everyone could agree that until we knew what would happen, it would be very hard to invest in almost anything. Who knows what?
Yeah.
There's 2 such different ways interest rates might go, where climate credits might go, that people were just sitting on their money. Nobody was launching anything new.
Yeah, we sell capital equipment that goes for, a good 6 figures per machine. And, I've learned a long time ago, as you have learned, that uncertainty is the enemy of business. Whether it's uncertain how good it's going to get or uncertain how bad it's going to get, uncertainty, no business person likes uncertainty. They don't want to invest in an uncertain future. They want to know.
So especially the tech startups I do, a lot of them are eco and clean and like green. And there was a point in time where I had like 3 different clean tech startups, all of which are very important to me. And they're all running out of money at the same time because they can't raise, because they're like, people just literally don't know whether the credits will be there next year. So who will invest in you at that point?
Right. Yeah. It's particularly right now, this very specific moment in time, all that is uncertain. So you describe yourself as someone who helps to take ideas to finished products. Can you walk me through, just generically speaking, through your typical process when a client approaches you with just an idea?
Yeah. So first, the first red or green flag. I don't really like signing NDAs. I think that a bit of a nasty sign is a founder overly worried that people are going to steal their idea. Ideas are cheap. They're almost valueless. I encounter 10 new ideas every single business day.
You know how many products I've seen in my 65 years going around the sun that I have actually invented in my head? I'm like, I thought of that. I didn't do anything about it.
Do it, right?
Right.
And so I tell people, prepare for folks to steal your idea. Make it so they can't steal your execution. And when I give one of my most popular talks, that's the most important lesson in the whole thing. People will steal your idea. And when they do, they'll actually probably be better capitalized or have more assets than you. You have to have an execution nobody can steal. And so if your idea is so what it says on the box that just telling me jeopardizes you, I don't think you're in a really good spot to sink in $50,000 to $100,000 into making it a reality if that's all it takes to tank your thing. So I instead start drilling them on their execution. Oh, you've got a dating app? Okay, this is going to live or die based on your ability to get 100,000 people on it. So what's your hook? What's your key influencer? What's your very daring ad copy that's bold and unignorable that makes people say, I'm downloading this instead of Hinge, right? Or if you're a B2B SaaS, which I always like better than B2C, let's say you're making a product that helps, banks better coordinate variable interest rates on their mortgage packages. And you're doing this not because you're some rando who had an idea, but because you used to work at a bank and you used to see how painful it is. You know exactly what the pain point is. In that case, your execution can be as simple as, hey, I have 10 LOIs from people I personally worked with who are ready to pilot this software. You don't. So of course I'll tell you what the software is like. What will you do with it, Bill Bolden? You're not going to get on the phone and call somebody from M&T Bank.
Yeah.
It's true. I won't, right? And so in probably the biggest example of this I ever saw, I had a startup that I was called in basically to rescue. Their developer had locked them out of the code and launched the product themselves the day before they were going to launch under a new brand name.
Wow.
And obviously legal action follows suit, right? But in the meantime, they're like,
first to market. Yeah.
We have nothing. And guess what? Despite the fact that they had me rebuild, and by the way, cheaper and better. Thank you. Despite the fact they had me rebuild the product, and it was easier the second time around because there was a lot of like decisions they got held up on the first time they built it, and now they knew exactly what they wanted. We relaunched it about 3 months later than their Stealing E Dev had launched it, and we were still very successful, and their Stealing E Dev was not, because their Stealing E Dev didn't know any of the right people. She couldn't steal their contact list, basically. She didn't have the respect in the community. She wasn't the person who wrote the book that led to this software, and my founders still were. And that's how much more important execution is than idea, is that I've actually literally watched the idea and the product be ripped away from someone, and we still out-succeeded them.
Yeah, it's almost never first to market that ultimately wins. If you look at the videotape business, the Betamax came out before the VHS tape. VHS, whoever was, I think Panasonic maybe was behind VHS, Sony was behind Beta. And, when something's introduced, the second person gets the ability to watch what mistakes they make, what the consumer adoption rate is, and then they come out with something better. The same is happening as we speak with Tesla. Tesla, they didn't pioneer an electric car, but they popularized electric cars. And the legacy companies, just kind of sat back and went, well, this is interesting. And now every company's making electric cars. And now the Chinese, they can't sell here right now, but they will own that market.
I have a
same thing with the mouse.
With the vehicle myself. Yeah. I have a fully electric Kia that I like just fine.
Yeah. But they weren't the first. They sat back, they watched, they got some free market research. They got, they had the ultimate focus group, the world looking, how they adopted the car, and they made whatever, pivots they had to make, and they came up with something that was successful. And the same with the mouse. Steve Jobs went to Xerox PARC. He looking at whatever they were doing at Xerox PARC, he saw this mouse, and he's like, "What is this?" And they said, "Well, we call it a mouse." And he came back to his people and said, "We need a mouse for our computers." And the same with the graphic user interface that came out of Xerox PARC, right? But it was very localized.
There's advantage too, and it comes back to product market fit. Sometimes when you're the first player, you have the burden of sort of creating a market yourself through education. By the time someone else comes in, the market is there and ready thanks to the first person's sacrifice, and the product can still be cloned, right? And so you look at something like something as simple as MySpace, right? Obviously here, my age is showing. I'm not going to go Betamax VHS. Right. But you look at something where like MySpace puts in the effort into giving this idea life, and then nobody needs convincing to move to Facebook. That was back when Facebook was kind of more like MySpace and not the thing today. But
well, and the same with LimeWire and Napster, where we all stole music from. Really, I think was the genesis behind Apple Music and Spotify. and iHeart and all the, various Pandora and all the different music platforms. Basically the fact that the record labels had, all their stuff being stolen from them from under their feet, partially motivated by greed. They were only selling albums. They didn't have, as many 45s. So if you loved one song that wasn't a single, you had to buy a $20 album. And that created a market for black market songs, which then told Apple and others, like, hey, there's a market to sell. Just instead of losing them, let's just sell them for $1 a piece, 99 cents a piece. And that created a whole opening for a market, which now music is a subscription business,
I came of age in the Columbia House Records era.
Uh-huh.
I remember being like, I like this one song, Flagpole Sitta. Now I have this freaking Harvey Danger album. What am I going to do with
Right.
it?
And then an album comes every month, for like overpriced. You could buy it cheaper at Tower Records. But at any rate, what's the biggest misconception that non-technical founders, someone with a product idea in their head, have when it comes to building and launching any kind of tech product?
Oh God, the
I
answer
could write a
to
book
this
on
is
that,
so
right?
unambiguous. It's if you build it, they won't come. I can't say it loudly enough. There is the extent of the block, the horse blinders a lot of my founders have, that they feel like if there was an app that XYZ'd, people would use it, is completely distinct from any of the decisions we make about using apps. Apps are at this point mostly forced on us by social forces. And even if people do hear about your app, when you're doing focus testing, yeses are maybes and maybes are nos. This is what I tell everyone. You sit down in a focus group and you ask people, hey, if there was an app that tracked how much milk you have or whatever and sent you a message when you need more milk, would you use it? And everyone says yes, because your question has no context. You're
Right.
only evaluating a world without milk app and a world with, and a world
Right.
with seems better, right? But then you go to the trouble and then you build milk app. And now that it's out there in the wild, people have to pick up their kids from soccer practice. They have to go to the gym. When they do get their phone out, TikTok is there ready to entertain them for 90 consecutive minutes. And they have to watch the latest episode of Severance. Is there still room for milk app in all that? Okay. So
Right.
I need, when we do the focus groups, every yes is downgraded to a maybe. Anyone who says maybe is basically no, or saying, once your product is so established that it's a bigger pain in my ass to not have it than have it, I guess I would use it.
Yeah.
Which is like how I feel about like Venmo. I have no enthusiasm for using Venmo, but at some point people wanted to give me money via Venmo. So sure.
So yeah, so you're slightly enthused at that point. You talk about downgrading answers. I learned about downgrading answers. We used to sell, well, we still do, but we used to sell a lot of equipment to China. We were the only things on the ship going that direction, right? Everything's coming here. And so I visited China a lot. And when I would go into negotiations, I found that they never said no. What they said was, this may be difficult, which meant hell no. But I didn't know that. I mean, to me, if I don't hear no, I keep selling, right? I just keep pushing. But for cultural reasons, and it's probably a little different today, for cultural reasons, no was considered rude. So they would use every word but no. And it took a while for me to realize that if they say, that could be difficult, okay, that's a no, try something else.
I also don't like to paint with a broad brush in today's world, because it may be construed wrong, but there are different cultures in different parts of the globe when it comes to their outsourcers. And I've worked with, I'm not going to say who and where, but there are some parts of the world where when I go to get quotes for outsourcers, I'll never hear no, up to and including if I ask for something that is mathematically impossible. And then there's other parts of the world where I will almost never hear yes, even if I'm asking for something that's eminently doable. It's a big world full of different cultures for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And it's really important to understand those cultures because the world is very, very small today.
I have had good and bad experiences with outstaffed firms from almost every major market, but a good and a bad one in each one.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they come in all flavors and sizes and shapes and all that. Can you share a success story where your guidance as a fractional CTO has made a critical difference in the company's trajectory?
Oh, I mean, a couple. First off, I do have 2 exits, working on a third, and those are like, I don't know, that's the scoreboard, right? Those are like home runs when you're a baseball player.
So exits meaning if you get this gig, that's the last gig you're going to do? Is that your exit or their exits?
In the startup sense. So, in the tech startup game, everyone wants to have a moment where the stock becomes liquid, and that's a liquidity event. And that's usually called an exit because it lets everyone who helped build it actually cash out. Okay.
Right.
So
Gotcha.
those are the big ones: is acquisitions, mergers, buyouts, and IPOs.
IPO is the golden ticket there. Yeah.
Right. So every single person who gets me in and is like, I'm going to pay you your rate, and to keep some skin in the game, you get 1% of the company in shares. Those shares are worth 0 forever. They're worth 0 when the company has made no dollars. They're still worth 0 when the company has made $50 million. One day, another company buys it or it goes public, and all of a sudden they are no longer worth 0.
Yeah.
Now, I've not had my Uber or Airbnb moment. I have gotten some, hey, I can afford a kitchen redesign type exits, which is nice. But I do usually build smaller businesses. I don't think I'm quite evil enough to build like a let's take over the whole world and then turn the screws to become everyone's nemesis kind of startup. And that's probably where the money is, but it's fine. I can sleep at night.
Yeah, there you go.
But I would say that there's also some of the biggest impacts I've had has really been just in my mentorship, which is I do the Techstars stuff because the more I give, the more I get. And I don't just mean that sometimes after the completion of the program, I can't be hired during the program. I'm there to give. Sometimes people do want to employ me after the program is over, but it is its own reward, and it also makes me better at my job to meet 16 new founders every month. It does. That's that many more ideas I'm being exposed to. I go back and research ways I can help them overcome their hurdles.
Right.
Now I know about 15 more tricky new algorithms, or a new vector search problem, or a new interesting social media hack that I didn't know before. I learn it all. I help them. And it's because I'm helping them that I just added another dozen tricks to the bag of tricks that goes up here.
Okay, I'm glad you said that because that is a perfect segue. We are mind melding right here. It's a perfect segue. How do you stay on top of evolving technologies like AI, serverless architecture, cloud services to ensure that your clients are getting the most cutting edge solutions? So one of them, you've already said, it's the fact that you engage with so many people. They're teaching you, you're teaching them. But how else do you stay on top of things? Because I'll tell you, your world has changed since we began speaking about 42 minutes ago. So, so you've been talking to me. You've missed that now, right? So, how do you stay on top of all this? Yeah.
So I this is gonna sound a little bit of this is that I am a humble and authentic person, but I do miss the hype cycles. So I know that AI is pretty cool. I've done some neat things with AI. I really have. But I'm also old enough to have watched the whole rinse and repeat of the metaverse and the NFTs and the everything is blockchain because it can be, and the cryptocurrency and the virtual reality and the gamification and the Web3 and the Web2 and the socials and the pivot to video, going back as far as there's been an internet. I have watched every new technology promise the moon, and then you get something out of it, sometimes even something of value, but it is not the moon. And so I understand that AI is a little more impressive than like, I mean, I think NFTs and the metaverse, a lot of us were calling BS sort of from the beginning. Like, what does this actually do?
Right.
Whereas my GitHub Copilot in my code editor really does do a great job of suggesting the next 3 or 4 lines of code I intend to type at any time. However, I can't let go. I can't have it take the reins because 4 out of 5 times I'm like, hey, thanks. Now I don't have to type that. And 1 out of 5 times I'm like, oh God, not that. Why would you suggest that block of code? That will drop the whole database. I'm so glad I didn't let you do that on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah. That makes sense. That's a wise move.
A little bit of skepticism is healthy. Right? AI is a little more real than all those other things, but all the same, the things that happen in LinkedIn posts don't really happen in real life. I know I work for between 2 and 4 different companies every day, and we still have accounts receivable, and we still sometimes fill out forms, and sometimes there's a bug you have to fix yourself. And sometimes there's a problem client who keeps you on the phone. I mean, the world is not changing that fast. And I'm in a fast changing industry. And if I can take one step back from the freaking LinkedIn news feed where everything is rocket ships and I just deployed $1 million app in 10 seconds and blah, blah, blah. All that stuff's the Great Gatsby. The pages inside the books are empty. We're still making money in normal, real ways out here.
So I wasn't planning on asking you this, but this question just popped up. How, if you're familiar with Silicon Valley, and I'm talking about the show, not the geography, how accurate is that to portraying the life of, the business you're in?
I tried to watch it, and it was funny, but it was a little too close to home.
So
it's one of those, everybody wants different things from their media, and I'm a little bit too much like in that show. I don't.
Is there a particular, if you know the characters well enough, is there a particular character that you identify? Okay. All right.
I'm often told that there's one that I am. And, honestly, though, when people say that, I'm like, just thanks for not comparing me to Sheldon. That's all that really matters.
Oh, my God. Yeah. I do enjoy watching little YouTube shorts of a young Sheldon. I find that somewhat humorous. But, yeah, I wouldn't want to be compared to him either.
I have cleared clients for comparing me to Sheldon.
So you have some interesting terms for some of the services you offer. You offer power hours, you offer VIP days, as well as ongoing fractional CTO engagements.
Mm-hmm.
How do you best determine which service is the best fit for a client's need?
Yeah, so really, there's a couple things that go into it. First, if I think that there's a balance where sometimes what people need is leadership and sometimes what they need is labor. And depending on how I assess their company, the power hour, which is obviously expensive because I do have to prepare for it, read all your docs, everything. Power hour, last time I did one, is $500 for an hour, but that also includes warm-up time and cool-down time.
Right.
Warm-up time and cool-down time being like time I spend preparing.
Sure. Before and after the hour, right. So to your client, it's an hour. To you, it's more.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's if I'm like evaluating the scope of their problems. I'm like, listen, there's just some stuff I need to get into with. And if we can have a real exchange about this, lay down some rules, I'm going to point you at like 10 libraries it doesn't seem like you're using yet, and I really want you to go research these libraries. That's when it's like, hey, for $500, I may be able to identify these time savings where you can stop your devs from spending a person month on like reinventing some wheel. Like, oh, you didn't know you could use Twilio for that. You didn't know you could use Claude for that. You didn't know you could use Clerk for that, whatever, right? A VIP day which last time I did one, those are $3,000 for a day, is I turn off my phone to everyone else and I'm yours for the day. And that starts to get into labor a little, right? So the difference is like, I'll be doing some incisive leadership, but you also need me to like be in your AWS, setting up your new deploy script architecture. You also need doing, right? And then if it's not something that can be encapsulated so well, that's when it's more of a fractional engagement. They're not listed on the website, but since then, I've also added mentorship packages, advisory packages. The difference is being, that mentorship is usually free, but I don't have to pick up the phone. Advisory is not paid, but it is in exchange for 1/4 of a point of equity, minimum, 1 hour biweekly, stuff like that. There's a lot of bad actors in this space. And I'm very surprised sometimes when people are like, whoa, you're going to help me with all this and you just want 1/2 a point of equity. And like, I had somebody ask me for 5 points of equity so they could like design my homepage. And it's like, no, is one of the lessons from one of the talks I give is protect your cap table, because equity feels so cheap in the beginning, but one day if you succeed and you go to raise seed or series A and you're sitting in a bank in a data room with the big partners from the bank or the venture capital, and they're like, all right, before we sink this $4 million into you at a 20 valuation, let's see how the ownership breaks down. And it's like, Amy, who's Amy? We never heard of Amy. Amy has 5% of your company. Be like, oh yeah, Amy got me a lead once.
That's a great lead, I guess.
Yeah. Right.
What advice would you give to your younger self regarding business?
Oh gosh. This is weird. I'm a happy person. I don't really think I'd mess with the time stream. I'm kind of happy how everything turned out. I have very few regrets. I can list my regrets on like 3 fingers, and none of them are even business related.
Good. Wow.
You're
I'm very
happy
lucky and blessed.
I'm happy with where I've ended up. And I also know that throwing darts, if you want to be a person who throws darts, you have to accept missing. So there are some misses that I regret, but I understand them as the cost of doing business so that I can have fun playing darts.
Well, when you play darts and you miss it, you also have a new calibration point. It's like like in the movies, there's a spotter and a sniper, and the spotter's got the binoculars out, and the sniper goes for the target, misses it by 2 inches, and the spotter will go, 2 inches to the left and 1/4 inch down. And I mean, you need that miss to calibrate the next shot in that example.
And I just do feel like a lot of people. So I've had some bad clients. I had a client that I don't think I did the best job for, and I feel really bad about that. I have a couple of I think decisions at some startups I made wrong, but I go back and I'm like, obviously I wish I hadn't done that, but what kind of rule or whatever am I willing to institute in order to stop that from happening again? And it's always of the form of like, be less trusting and like people less, not take chances. And I'm not willing to. This actually is downstream of something that happens at every startup I work with. At some point, a bug gets out to prod. Always, right? And that people are like, this is bad. I wish this bug hadn't got out. How will we stop this from happening again? Never again, right? And I start going over the options, which is like longer QA processes. All right, will you pay a tax of 1 week QA cycles on everything before it goes out? More unit tests. Will you pay a tax of duplicating all your work for every block of code you write, a block of code that tests it? there is always a price to pay. And after I go after them all, then it's like, so, you can accept that this is the first bug we've had in 3 months and keep things fast and lean or whatever. Or we can make everyone wear giant Sisyphus boulders and you won't have another bug. And that'll be the outcome. And then they're like, okay, I guess I like this way better. I'll get over it.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about bad clients. I refuse to change the way I do business because I think I would miss more than I gain just to avoid one bad outcome.
Yeah. 2 questions, one philosophical, one highly, highly technical. So fair warning. How did you define success when you first started your company, and how do you define it today?
Same way. Make enough money to buy the things I want within reason for my family, which are modest, while being able to sleep at night. That's what I wanted when I started doing this. I knew I wanted to keep building startups, but it wasn't doing a very good job feeding my family because I had several consecutive bad bets that I was full-time for. So I invented this fractionaling lifestyle for myself before they had the word for it, because I was trying to find a way to still do what I love while putting food on my family within reason. Dude, I don't have a mansion. I don't got no Lambo. I drive an electric Kia, and I live in a 900 square foot ranch home in Buffalo, right? I just want to be able to enjoy sushi once a week and not do anything that gives me trauma or makes the world a worse place over it. That's where I started. 5.5 years later, that's still the goal. I'm just getting better at it.
Kind of like the original published Yahoo business model, do no harm, right?
Yeah, and the Google don't be evil, right?
Don't be evil, yeah.
Which was removed about a decade ago.
Well, I guess maybe they're being a little more transparent. And then the highly, highly, highly technical question: tabs or spaces?
Spaces.
Now that's a Silicon. Okay, all right. So you know the reference. That's a Silicon Valley ongoing joke.
Real. That thing is very real.
Is it real? Yes, they make it a real thing in Silicon Valley. It's like you get fired over tabs or spaces.
For those of you keeping track at home, I'm spaces 2. But I also like to work in Node and TypeScript where it doesn't matter. Those of you who work in Python. I will tell you, though, that there's really only tabs versus spaces has always been a debate. I think spaces has won it. 2 versus 4 has always been a debate. But if you are ever talking to a developer who goes for 3, run far, far, far away. Anyone who
don't trust the 3 spaces person.
They want 3 is they're like striking this like I'm being difficult intentionally path, right?
And for my audience,
they're
that's
third-party voters of programming.
they're the independents and the libertarians and the green parties and all that. For my audience that are now shaking their heads or scratching their heads and going, "What the hell are these guys talking about?" Describe what I'm talking about. Spaces.
Yeah. So we have what they like to call bike shed problems in computer science. It goes off a famous fable where you go to a big board full of executives and you say you're going to build a nuclear reactor. And they're like, okay. And that also there's going to be a shed out front where people can park their bike while they go to work at the reactor. You're going to be painting it pink. And then somebody's like, why is it shouldn't be pink. I would like it to be red. And so the moral of the story is that for the incredibly important thing, people don't care or are a little afraid to think critically about it, or they just assume that someone smarter than them who's into nuclear science knows what they're talking about. But when you come down to something trivial, everyone gets to have an opinion.
Like
right?
the spaces between certain sections of code, whether you
right. So tabs or spaces is the oldest version of that, which is that when you have a line of code and then you indent the next line of code, do you do it by having a tab stop or by having 2 or 4 space characters.
Yeah.
It has been relevant for a while thanks to editors getting better, but it is the OG.
It is the OG color of the shed.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it makes no difference to us civilians, but when you're working at the reactor and parking your bike in it, it's a huge deal.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And these days, go ahead.
No. Go ahead. These days.
Well, doing what I do, I've identified some other bike sheds in my line of work too. No one else. I don't really have to code with other people very often anymore, but when I'm working with the people building the app, it's amazing. Like, I don't care if it integrates with Zapier or the Zoom Marketplace. I don't care if it's in Salesforce. You don't? If it integrates with Salesforce, you might get another $1 million. Oh, okay, that sounds cool. But then you give them like their little Duolingo mascot or whatever, or like the little thing, and all of a sudden it is game over. The thing that is like recognizable is like, stop the presses.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember recently, and it was really a PR stunt, but Jaguar changed their logo, right? And they announced they were changing their logo, and they came up with this advertising campaign that was just like right out of an LSD trip. It was all pastel colors, and where Jaguar was more of a racing heritage and all that, but they went with something very, 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 very artsy and very against their long-established reputation, and it created this frenzy online. People hated it, but guess what happened? Jaguar was on. They got so much free advertising because they just dropped a couple of things on YouTube and LinkedIn and whatever social media channels, and then the world exploded. For a good 2 weeks, that's all people were talking about, and that kind of, brought back the old phrase is there's no such thing as bad publicity. There's just publicity. And they didn't do it in a way that alienated, they didn't get into social issues. They didn't say, left or right or blue or red or,
there are
whatever.
Other car companies undergoing rebrands that are more salient right now. We won't talk about them.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot on the show I don't like to talk about just because I like to keep my audience, you say one thing and then the people who already like you more, and the people who thought you're all right hate you.
My Kia Electric is from the year after. I think I've read that the Kia rebrand was to help distance themselves and draw a line in the sand from the models that were so easily stolen and jacked.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how accurate this is. I read that when they changed from the letters Kia in a circle to the new one that looks vaguely like Nine Inch Nails logo. Nails.
Yeah.
Backwards.
It's like Edward Scissorhand designed it.
Yeah. That signifies like this Kia is post-stealable.
Yeah. Well, the whole Kia, Hyundai, Genesis family, it's all Hyundai, right? And then Hyundai decided that the Hyundai cars were going to go upscale and we need a cheaper brand. So they brought out Kia. And now Kias are rather upscale, so they came up with Genesis. Genesis is where Toyota has Lexus, and Nissan has Infiniti, and Honda has Acura. Genesis is that for Hyundai.
I might not be up at it. I thought Genesis was with Chrysler.
No. The Genesis there was a Hyundai Genesis, which was a Hyundai model. And then for some reason, when they created their luxury brand, they used a name of one of their Hyundai cars, which created a lot of market confusion among consumers. But Genesis is now their higher end brand. So it's their Lexus, it's their Infiniti, it's their Acura.
Got it. I don't remember what the thing is I'm thinking of that's Chrysler's more luxury brand then.
Well, Chrysler's in a whole lot of trouble. Huge amount of trouble right now because they're owned by Stellantis, which is an Italian company. Originally, they merged with Mercedes, and then Mercedes said, "We can't work with you Americans," and the Americans said, "We can't work with you Germans."
That pushed out the update that started playing ads in people's vehicles without their consent.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that, but yeah, Stellantis it was basically Fiat that bought Chrysler, and then the Fiat group rebranded and called themselves Stellantis. Because Fiat was too familiar. I don't know the reason behind that. But Stellantis owns Fiat, and they own Chrysler, and they own Jeep, and the Dodge brands, and a whole bunch of other car companies as well.
I should know this. One of my upcoming startups is Automotive.
Oh, nice. I assume an EV type automotive?
No, it's part of marketing for the dealership
Oh,
industry.
okay. All right. Very good. Well, we are out of time. Bill Boulden, Fractional CTO, 2 spaces, not tabs, and definitely not 3 spaces. Thank you for being my guest on the show. I found this
Thank you for
conversation
having me,
very
Mike.
insightful and more importantly, very interesting. So thanks for sharing.
You're super welcome. It's been a pleasure being here. I hope I helped some aspiring founders not make a few mistakes. Remember, just because you build the app doesn't mean people hear about it. We got to talk about marketing and product market fit. You can always find me at Bill Boulden on LinkedIn or at billbolden.com. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I will have links for those of you watching this on YouTube. Just look down here, click show more, and you'll see a link to Bill's website. And for those listening on your favorite podcast app, when you get to your destination or get off the treadmill or whatever you're doing, go to the podcast app, look at the show notes, and Bill's contact information will be there as well. Bill, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast. A very special thanks to Bill Bolden for being my guest on the show. The Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast is available on all major podcast sites and on the Reluctant Entrepreneur YouTube channel. We've been recording future episodes with fascinating guests, which I'm excited to share with you. So don't miss out. Subscribe to the podcast to be notified when new episodes are released. We release new episodes twice a month on the first and third Tuesday. If you're an entrepreneur or know of an entrepreneur who would like to be a guest on my show, please let me know. Visit mikeconrad.com/podcast and apply to be a guest or to recommend a guest. Just remember, that's Conrad spelled with a K. If you'd like to reach out to me, I love to hear from you. My email address is mike@mikeconrad.com. Once again, Conrad with a K. And a shameless plug, if you're interested in my book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, Anatomy of a Business Startup from Uncertainty to Unstoppable, it's available as a paperback as well as a Kindle version, both available on Amazon, and as an audiobook, available on both Audible and Amazon. Thanks again for listening or watching. Until I see you again, be unstoppable.